This unrated $250,000 indie slasher didn't just survive brutal backlash, it crushed Oscar contenders at the box office. But what's even more disturbing than what you see on screen is how they made it. Today on Iconic TV Rewind, we're uncovering 20 bizarre, shocking facts about Terrifier 2. The real meat inside the prosthetics, the ending that had to be rewritten because of another horror film, and the viral chaos that turned Art the Clown into a box office nightmare. Fact 1. People actually called ambulances. When reports started circulating that viewers were fainting during screenings of Terrifier 2, many assumed it was clever guerrilla marketing. After all, horror films have exaggerated audience reactions for decades. But this time, the stories weren't manufactured. Multiple screenings across the country documented people passing out, vomiting, or walking out mid-scene. One theater in Austin reportedly called emergency services after a viewer collapsed during the now infamous bedroom sequence. Director Damien Leone later addressed the rumors directly, stating the reactions were real and not staged. That authenticity mattered. In an era where viral marketing often feels artificial, this felt chaotic and uncontrolled. Social media lit up with photos of passed-out moviegoers and warning posts from theaters advising viewers to proceed at their own risk. The conversation shifted instantly from indie slasher sequel to the movie people can't physically handle. And that transformation, from niche horror follow-up to cultural dare, changed everything. Fact 2. It was never rated by the MPAA. Most theatrical horror films fight hard for an R rating. Studios negotiate trim frames, digitally darkened blood, or shorten violent beats just to secure that commercially viable classification. But Terrifier 2 took a different route. It remained officially unrated. Not because it wasn't submitted, but because the cuts required to secure an R would have fundamentally altered its most infamous sequences. The MPAA has historically demanded significant edits from extreme horror films, especially when violence is prolonged or presented with detail rather than implication. Leone has openly stated that compromising the brutality of certain scenes would have gutted the film's identity. So instead of toning it down, the team embraced the unrated label. And somehow, against industry logic, that gamble paid off. The film secured wide theatrical distribution without a traditional rating, something almost unheard of at this scale. The controversy didn't limit it, it amplified it. The unrated tag became less of a warning and more of a challenge. Fact 3. The bedroom scene was built from real meat and inflatable gloves. The bedroom scene is the sequence that sparked headlines, triggered fainting reports, and redefined the franchise's reputation. But what most viewers don't realize is how absurdly handmade it was. To achieve that grotesque realism, the production constructed a full-body practical dummy packed with real chicken and pork beneath layered prosthetics. When Art carves into the body on screen, he is physically cutting through actual meat. Puppeteers operated rods from behind walls and underneath the set to manipulate limbs, while inflatable latex gloves were placed inside the chest cavity to simulate subtle breathing movements during the early stages of the attack. Even more surprising is how it was funded. The film's Indiegogo campaign, which vastly exceeded its goal, allowed Leone to push the sequence far beyond what the original budget could support. Instead of scaling back, he escalated. The result wasn't polished studio CGI. It was tactile, messy, disturbingly physical horror that audiences could almost smell through the screen. And that commitment to practical brutality is what made it unforgettable. Fact 4. The director personally designed most of the gore effects himself. Unlike major studio productions with large effects departments, Terrifier 2 relied heavily on its director's hands-on craftsmanship. Damien Leone, who began his career in makeup effects, personally sculpted and painted many of the prosthetics used throughout the film. Every day of shooting required Art the Clown's makeup to be meticulously applied, a process that blended theatrical precision with grindhouse ambition. Leone has admitted he doesn't specialize in complex animatronics, which forced creative problem-solving. Instead of relying on expensive robotics, he engineered practical illusions using low-cost materials and old-school ingenuity. The result feels raw rather than mechanical, which ironically enhances the realism. there's a certain unpredictability in practical effects that digital tools can't replicate. Blood pools differently. Flesh rips apart unevenly. That chaos gives Terrifier 2 its uneasy authenticity. It doesn't feel engineered by committee. It feels handcrafted, and that makes the violence feel far more personal. Fact 5. A $250,000 indie film made over $15 million worldwide. On paper, Terrifier 2 should have been a modest streaming success at best. With an estimated budget around $250,000, expectations were conservative. Industry projections reportedly placed its potential earnings well under the $1 million mark. Instead, it exploded. The film ultimately grossed over $15 million worldwide, outperforming several prestige awards contenders during overlapping release windows and expanding from a limited theatrical event into over 1,500 screens at its peak. Even more unusually, it experienced strong second weekend holds, a rare phenomenon for independent horror without major studio backing. In a landscape dominated by franchise tentpoles and corporate marketing budgets, this unrated splatter sequel carved out its own space through word-of-mouth shock and viral momentum. Hollywood didn't predict it. Critics didn't champion it, but audiences showed up, sometimes leaving on stretchers. Fact 6. It was only supposed to play for one weekend. When Terrifier 2 first hit theaters, it wasn't positioned as a wide horror event. It was scheduled as a limited one-weekend theatrical experiment, essentially a special engagement for hardcore fans. The expectation was simple: play briefly, generate some buzz, transition to digital. But the buzz didn't fade. It detonated. Instead of disappearing after a single weekend, the film stayed in the top 10 for multiple weeks. Theater chains began expanding showtimes rather than cutting them. At its peak, the movie grew to more than 1,500 screens nationwide, a scale almost unheard of for an unrated indie splatter film. Even more unusual was its hold. In a market where horror films often collapse after opening weekend, Terrifier 2 demonstrated strong retention. Audiences weren't just curious, they were dragging friends to see if they could handle it. The limited-run experiment turned into a theatrical phenomenon, not because of studio push, but because viewers refused to let it die. Fact 7. The fainting reports fueled a box office surge. Horror marketing campaigns often try to simulate shock. Planted stories, exaggerated testimonials, carefully edited reaction videos. But the moment real fainting reports surfaced online, something unpredictable happened. The movie stopped being entertainment and became a dare. Photos of passed-out audience members circulated across Twitter and TikTok. Theater warning signs advising viewer discretion went viral. Even mainstream outlets began reporting on the chaos, and instead of deterring ticket buyers, the controversy created a psychological challenge. Could you sit through it? Director Damien Leone has acknowledged that once those stories hit social media, sales spiked dramatically. The narrative shifted from extreme indie horror sequel to the film people physically can't endure. That framing created urgency. It transformed screenings into endurance tests. People weren't just watching a movie, they were proving something. And controversy, in this case, became rocket fuel. Fact 8. The original ending was scrapped due to competition. Long before the film reached theaters, Damien Leone had envisioned a different final shock. His original post-credits concept reportedly involved art emerging grotesquely from the back of Victoria's head, a visual meant to cement the franchise's commitment to body horror escalation. Then the film Malignant was released. James Wan's film featured a strikingly similar parasitic twin reveal, and Leone recognized the overlap immediately. Rather than risk comparisons or accusations of imitation, he scrapped his ending entirely. What replaced it was arguably more disturbing: the grotesque hospital sequence in which Victoria gives birth to Art's severed head. The absurdity of the moment, combined with its sheer physical grotesqueness, felt both shocking and perversely playful. Ironically, abandoning the original idea may have resulted in something even more memorable. It proved Leone wasn't just escalating violence, he was evolving mythology. Fact 9. Art actually speaks in the Art Krispies commercial. Art the Clown is defined by silence. He never speaks, never screams, never taunts verbally. His menace comes from exaggerated expressions and mime-like cruelty. But in one surreal dream sequence, Art suddenly appears in a parody cereal commercial, smiling brightly as he promotes Art Krispies. And that cheerful voiceover, it's performed by David Howard Thornton himself. It's the only moment in the franchise where Art is technically given a voice, even if it exists within a stylized commercial parody. The tonal shift is intentional. Leone wanted to lean into cartoon absurdity, to remind viewers that Art operates in a strange liminal space between grindhouse slasher and twisted Looney Tunes villain. That bizarre juxtaposition, childlike enthusiasm paired with extreme violence, is what makes Art uniquely unsettling. He isn't just brutal, he's gleeful. Fact 10. The haunted house scenes were filmed in a real attraction. The grimy, claustrophobic haunted house sequences weren't built entirely from scratch. The production filmed inside Fright Factory, an actual operational haunted attraction. Instead of constructing elaborate sets, the crew incorporated existing rooms, corridors, and props into the film's narrative environment. That decision saved money, but it also enhanced authenticity. Real haunted attractions are designed to overwhelm the senses with clutter, tight passageways, and layered textures. That density translates on camera. The walls feel closer. The lighting feels uneven. There's a tactile realism to the environment that polished studio builds often lack. It also reinforces the franchise's carnival horror aesthetic, a world where spectacle and brutality blur together. And in that maze of flickering lights and cheap latex masks, Art doesn't feel like an actor in makeup. He feels like something that belongs there. Fact 11. Art finally met someone who could fight back. Art the Clown isn't just a slasher villain anymore, he's a symbol. And Damien Leone knew that if the franchise was going to survive beyond shock value, Art needed a true rival. Not another disposable final girl, not another screaming victim, a counterpart. Leone has openly stated that he approached the dynamic between Art and Sienna like the relationship between Batman and the Joker. Two opposing forces locked into mythic conflict. Sienna wasn't written as a survivor by accident. She was engineered as a counterbalance. Her angelic warrior costume, her dreamlike prophetic arc, and even the sword she wields were designed to give her symbolic weight. She isn't just reacting to chaos, she represents order pushing back against it. That shift matters, because once a villain has a worthy adversary, the story stops being episodic violence and becomes mythology. It creates anticipation. It builds franchise longevity. Art isn't just killing anymore. He's engaged in something bigger. Fact 12. Filming began in 2019. Then COVID nearly killed the project. Production on Terrifier 2 began in October 2019. The team was deep into filming when early 2020 brought the world to a halt. Like countless independent productions, the movie entered limbo. And for a film operating on razor-thin margins, a shutdown wasn't just inconvenient, it was potentially fatal. Independent horror doesn't have a corporate cushion. Delays mean storage fees, lost locations, scheduling conflicts, and budget strain. Momentum evaporates quickly. Cast members move on, investors get nervous, projects disappear quietly. For a period, it genuinely seemed possible that Terrifier 2 might never be completed the way it was intended. But instead of scaling back, the delay extended post-production time. Leone continued refining effects, editing sequences, and sharpening tone. When theaters finally reopened, the film didn't limp into release. It arrived sharpened. Fact 13. Distributors expected it to make under $1 million. Before release, expectations were modest, almost dismissive. Industry projections reportedly placed the film's ceiling at under $1 million domestically. It was viewed as a niche exploitation horror with limited crossover appeal. The idea that an unrated splatter sequel could break into mainstream box office territory seemed unrealistic. But as word of mouth accelerated, those projections collapsed. The film didn't just surpass early estimates, it obliterated them. What was supposed to be a contained cult release turned into a national conversation piece. That underestimation adds another layer to its success story. This wasn't a calculated studio bet that paid off. It was a film the industry didn't fully believe in, but audiences proved them wrong. Fact 14, the creepiest character was almost never created. One of the most unsettling additions to Terrifier 2 isn't one of the victims. It's the silent, smiling presence known as the Little Pale Girl, a character whose eerie mimicry and ghost-like stillness shift the film from pure slasher brutality into something far stranger. What makes her existence even more surprising is that she wasn't part of the earliest version of the script. Damien Leone introduced the character later in development as the mythology expanded. Art had always been terrifying on his own, but the sequel demanded something more layered. That subtle shift changes how you interpret the entire film. It's no longer just about endurance, it's about legacy, about evil multiplying rather than dying. And the fact that this mythology-defining character almost didn't exist makes her quiet stare even more disturbing. Fact 15, it almost went straight to streaming. Before the viral explosion, Terrifier 2 wasn't guaranteed a theatrical breakthrough. Independent horror sequels frequently transition directly to video on demand or streaming platforms, especially when budgets are modest and marketing resources limited. The initial theatrical plan was restrained. There was no guarantee of massive expansion. In another timeline, this film quietly lands online, builds a slow cult following, and becomes a midnight movie recommendation. Instead, theatrical buzz, fueled by controversy and endurance test storytelling, convinced exhibitors to take the risk. That decision changed everything. The communal experience of watching audiences react in real time, the gasps, the walkouts, the laughter, turned it into an event rather than just content. Streaming can create fandom, but theaters created legend. Fact 16, the secret origin. Most viewers missed. Long before Art headlined theaters, he appeared in Leone's 2008 short film, The Ninth Circle. That early project laid the groundwork for the character's aesthetic and tone. In Terrifier 2, sharp-eyed fans can spot subtle nods to that origin. Certain cloaked figures and designs echo Leone's first short, tying the larger universe together. It's a reminder that Art didn't emerge from nowhere. He evolved from micro-budget short film villain to theatrical box office disruptor. The seeds were planted over a decade earlier, and now they're bearing blood-soaked fruit. Fact 17. David Howard Thornton endures hours of makeup every day. Art's pale face, exaggerated grin, and stark black and white design look deceptively simple, but achieving that crisp, theatrical finish requires extensive daily application. David Howard Thornton has described sitting in the makeup chair for hours before filming even begins. Layering prosthetics, refining contours, locking in expressions, it's a meticulous process. And because Art relies entirely on physical performance rather than dialogue, Thornton's facial control becomes critical. Every eye movement, every exaggerated grin, every frozen stare has to land precisely. The silence is strategic, and the performance beneath the paint is what keeps Art from becoming just another masked slasher. Fact 18. The Oscar submission was real, even if it was a joke. At the height of the film's viral momentum, distributor Bloody Disgusting did something that felt almost surreal. They officially submitted Terrifier 2 for Academy Award consideration. It wasn't because anyone genuinely believed the film would be nominated for Best Picture. The move was half satire, half statement, a way of forcing one of Hollywood's most prestigious institutions to at least acknowledge a film many critics dismissed outright. There's something poetic about that gesture. An unrated splatter sequel built on practical gore, made for a fraction of most awards contenders' catering budgets, suddenly sharing submission paperwork with prestige dramas and biopics. It blurred the line between high art and exploitation cinema in a way that felt intentionally provocative. Of course, no nomination followed. That was never the point. The point was disruption. It was a reminder that horror, especially extreme horror, doesn't need institutional validation to leave a cultural mark. In fact, sometimes the rejection is part of the appeal. And in that moment, Terrifier 2 stopped being just a cult hit. It became a conversation piece. Fact 19. Hollywood didn't just underestimate it. They misread the audience. When distributors and analysts looked at Terrifier 2, they saw a hyper-violent sequel to a niche indie slasher. They didn't see a breakout theatrical success. Early expectations were modest to the point of dismissal, with projections that placed its ceiling well below mainstream relevance. But what those projections failed to measure was appetite. Horror audiences had been conditioned by sanitized studio thrillers and quick-cut violence designed to avoid ratings trouble. Terrifier 2 offered something unapologetically tactile and confrontational. It didn't wink at the audience. It didn't soften its edges. It leaned in, and viewers responded. The film's financial trajectory wasn't just surprising, it exposed a gap between industry assumptions and audience desire. People weren't tired of extreme horror. They were tired of safe horror. That miscalculation transformed the movie's success into something symbolic. It wasn't only a win for one director, it was proof that raw, independent horror could still command theatrical attention without compromise. Fact 20. The scene that proves. This was never just about the gore. For all the blood, controversy, and endurance test marketing, one of the most unforgettable images in the film isn't the violence itself. It's Art the Clown, wearing a ruffled apron covered in kittens, cheerfully feeding mashed potatoes to the mutilated remains of a victim seated at a dining table. The scene is absurd. It's grotesque. It's darkly comedic in a way that feels almost cartoonish. And yet it's deeply unsettling because of how normal Art behaves within the madness. He isn't raging, he isn't frantic. He's playful, domestic, proud of his presentation. That tonal whiplash, the collision between Looney Tunes' physicality and grindhouse brutality, is the secret ingredient. It's what separates Art from other modern slashers. He isn't just a killer, he's theatrical and expressive. He treats murder like performance art. And that bizarre balance between childlike glee and stomach-turning violence is what audiences couldn't look away from. It's why people fainted. It's why word of mouth spread. It's why a $250,000 indie film built from practical effects and creative stubbornness carved its way into the mainstream. If you made it through this breakdown without looking away, you might be able to handle the movie itself. But the real question is, could you sit through the bedroom scene? If you want more deep dives into the chaos behind your favorite horror films, subscribe to Iconic TV Rewind. Because Art the Clown may be silent, but this franchise isn't done talking.